All right, welcome to the end of year review. This is going to be a long video. We're going to do a deep dive into the year that's been, where we're at now, and where we're going over the next year. So here's what this guide is going to help you do. It's going to help you process all the loose ends, close open loops, and deep clean your personal operating system. So everything from task management to email, you name it. Then we're going to take stock of the year that's been, the wins, losses, lessons, and everything else to help you gain insights about yourself, how you're positioned, and how you might act differently in the year ahead. This is a deeply introspective process that takes some time, but it is well worth it. Then we're going to define or redefine, if you already have them, some personal principles that will help guide your goals, projects, and decisions over the year to come. After that, we'll set intentions for the next year and get clear on the next 90 days of execution. As I'll explain later in this video, I don't really believe in sort of like long scale annual planning. I think that a year is too long to get extremely detailed on a plan, and I much prefer to do 90-day cycles, as you will see. Now, before we get any further, you can download the annual review workbook that is a companion to this video. This is available in Notion and Google Docs. You can go through it and work through this in your own time. It's got everything in there. There's nothing in this video that is not mentioned in that document. So make sure to check that out. There is a link in the description below to download it. So why do we do this annual review process? Why do we work through it? Well, it's because it's an intentional moment of introspection. A lot of people, they go through their year and they just act on autopilot. They get things done, they complete tasks, they take care of their family, they do what they need to do, but they don't stop for a day or two or even a few hours to really think about what's going on, where they're going, what they've done, what opportunities are, in front of them, what problems they could solve, what challenges they're facing. And at this time of year, it's really good to just step back, right? Look at your life, look at what's going on from a 30,000 foot view and be strategic and really think and introspect. That is one of the core reasons why we go through this process. It's not all introspection. We are going to be doing a lot of planning as well. So here's how it's going to work. We're going to start with preparation, as I mentioned. Then we're going to move on to a review phase. Okay, so we're going to take stock of our year and we're going to do some free-form reflection and structured analysis. Then we're going to bridge, looking at the principles, looking at our position, our advantages, our leverage points. And then the phase 4, the final phase, will be planning, where we set clear goals and create a focused 90-day action plan with very specific milestones, systems, and action steps to move forward. So phase 1 is preparation, and there's 2 parts to this. The first is the setup. Okay, so what a lot of people will do when it comes to any sort of annual review process is they might see a YouTube video like this, or they might read a book or a blog post about it, and then they kind of think, oh, I should do that. The year's running out. Let me just follow this template. And they go and do that. They spend an hour on it maybe, or 2 hours, and that's fine. But it rarely leads to insight and clarity. And the reason why is because they're not taking the process seriously. This is a very serious thing. It takes time, it takes focused effort, and you should treat it as a form of deep work. Taking 1 to 2 days out of your entire year to review and plan is one of the highest leverage things you can do, okay? If you feel like you're too busy to set aside time to do this, then it's even more important that you do it. You want to view this as like the strategist in your head going, okay, we've just had 12 months. We're going to have another 12 months. How do we make that 12 months optimal? Right? How do we make sure we're heading in the right direction? And if it takes you 2 days to do that, even if it takes you a bit longer, then it's still worth it. It's a huge return on your time investment. So if at any point when you're doing this, you kind of feel unproductive because you're not like creating anything, you're not generating anything, know that you are. You're generating clarity and insight. You're giving yourself the foundation to make better decisions. So you want to block out the time for this. I like to dedicate 2 days to this review process, 3 to 4 hours a day usually over 2 days. It doesn't always take this long, but I don't like to rush it because you don't gain anything by rushing this process. You want to work, you want to get it done in a focused environment, and you want to have a focused mindset. As I mentioned, you want to treat this as deep work because that's what it is. One thing I like to do, not every year, but as often as I can, is actually book an Airbnb or book a hotel and just get away from my normal environment. Also because new stimuli kind of sparks new creativity, new ideas, all that kind of stuff. It's very helpful. If you can't do that, just make sure your environment is focused, head to a cafe, do what you need to do. Use pen and paper. This is one that a lot of people disagree with me on because they're like, well, you can just type and it's like 10 times faster. Yeah, it is, but there's a benefit to the slowness and intentionality of pen and paper, even if it takes twice as long. It forces you to slow down, it forces you to think, and it's very conducive to the introspective process that is what this annual review is. Finally, you want to be in a well-rested, good state. You don't need to feel like $1 million, but you shouldn't be in an acutely negative state, or it will negatively affect how you think about and frame things, right? So if you're ill, if you're exhausted, like you had a terrible sleep, then what do you think is going to happen when it comes time to plan out your goals for next year? It's going to affect them. It's going to affect how you think, how motivated you feel, and the decisions you make, essentially. So that is a setup. And we want to then move on to processing. A lot of people start their review, they don't clean up the things in front of them, they don't process all these loose ends, and then they sit down to start the review and something pops in to their mind. Oh, I got to call Karen. There's an email I haven't responded to. Oh, my Notion notes are all messy and I need to organize that because I have an issue with productivity and this makes me feel productive. You want to get this stuff out of the way first. So you want to clean and organize your workspace. If you're performing your annual review from your office or your home office, then start by getting organized. Clear your desk, put things in their place, make it an environment that you want to spend time in because you're going to be spending some time in it. Process your physical world. If you have any paper documents around you, note cards, other physical elements that need processed, do so. Process your email and other inboxes. So get to inbox zero. If there are emails that need to be handled and can be done in under 2 minutes, then handle them. Otherwise, convert them into tasks if you don't want to handle them right now. And then process your task management and other similar systems. So review your list of tasks, make changes, edits, and updates as necessary. Get everything in your head, all the things you need to do, dump them in there, organize them. You want to externalize as many open loops as possible before starting the review process. You want to clear out your mind. And then any other digital organization. So you may want to clean up your files and folders, your notes, and then browser bookmarks as well. Okay, once you've done all that, it's time to move on to the review. Where we start with the review is a free-form narrative writing exercise. A lot of annual review processes will tell you or they'll prompt you with very specific questions, and we are going to get to those. But I think it's very useful to do sort of like a morning pages general mind dump about your year with no prompts, with no rules other than the term I'm about to share with you, but just writing, right? Just as you would talk to a friend. There are 2 rules to this, which is that you do not self-censor or self-edit. You're completely honest with yourself. If you're frustrated with the year that's been, then write about that. Get it on the page. No one needs to read this other than you. The other rule is that you need to keep writing. Not forever, but this is a momentum-centric activity and it benefits from speed and flow. And so this means following tangents where they lead, not self-critiquing, and just continuing to write. Just keep going until you've kind of got it all out. It might be helpful to imagine a friend asking you, so how did your year go? I want to hear all the details. Don't hold back. Just tell me all about it, right? So if you need a prompt, then start with that. Write like you talk. Don't try to sound smart. No one needs to read this. Don't try to write extremely well. Just write what you're thinking. Know that there will be an overlap between this free-form review and the next step, which is more specific. For example, one of the questions in the specific review step is what went well this year, and you're likely going to answer this as part of your free-form review. Do not worry about this overlap. It's fine. Don't hold back because you know or you think you're going to answer the question later. Finally, aim for at least 3 pages if you're writing by hand, like 3 pages of a notebook, or 750 words of typing. I recommend that you use pen and paper, again, for reasons I stated earlier, but you do you. Okay, so once you've done this free form review, then it's time to move on to the specific review, where we look at buckets or areas of our life, events that have taken place, character, trait, principles, how we've lived up to these or how we haven't, and then some general review questions to round it off. So the place you want to start is by looking at the areas of your life. And your areas might look different to mine. You might not even have defined any in the past, but these are my ones. So work, career, and business. You can get more granular on this if you want. If you have multiple professional areas, like you have a job and a side project. If you run a business, I do recommend a business-specific review done separately, which is another process. But for now, you can just do like the high-level stuff. I just like to keep this as one area, even though I've got multiple business projects going on. Health and fitness, family, fun/challenge, spiritual, faith, and then financial. Again, you might have your own, add them accordingly, but I recommend having no more than 7. With work, career, and business specifically, there are 2 extra questions that I like to add. The bottom 4, I pretty much ask for all or answer for all areas, but it's what is the 20% of work that produced 80% of the results? Which projects did I finish? List everything out. What went well in this area? Did I achieve the goals I set? If I set them, what didn't go so well in this area? Which lessons did I learn? And what would I score this area out of 10? And why have I given myself that score? So here's an example for the work area. You can see, I wrote what was the 20% of work, emailing the list 3 times per week instead of once per week, which increased sales by 50% this year. This is hypothetical, by the way. Upgrading existing customers into a new bundle offer, so on and so on and so forth. What projects did I finish? Listed them out. What went well? A few things there. What lessons did I learn? And then what would I score this area out of 10? So basically for the remaining areas, these are the prompts that I answer. What went well, what didn't go so well, what lessons, and what would I score this area? You might want to answer specific questions. If so, that's fine. You can add to this. I didn't invent these questions. It's not like copyrighted, so just do it how you want. Okay, once you've gone through all the areas, like all the ones you've listed out, it's time to move on to events. So this is where you think back, you can look back at your calendar. It's a very useful thing to do. And essentially ask, what were the key events, experiences, and highlights? Might be that you got promoted in the middle of the year. It might be that you went on a 2-week trip to Europe. You've likely already written about these in your free-form review, but it's worth just listing them out because this annual review that you're working on is something that you can look back at in 2, 3, 4, 5 years or longer and just see that list and be like, oh yeah, that's right, I did that in 2024. Next, we have the character trait principle. So I find it useful to judge myself against important traits and principles that I want to live by. So for example, with traits, I've got a couple of them, but like 7 or 8. Here's 3 examples. So work ethic and focus, I rate myself out of 10 on that. And then I write like a paragraph or 2 on my reason for the rating. Same with confidence, action orientation, and so on. Here's an example. So for work ethic and focus, 7 out of 10. I was on and off this year. I'd have periods of intense focus followed by laziness and procrastination. Just an explanation for it. You want to do the same for specific principles if you have them. A few of mine, instead of focusing directly on change, which is self-referential, throw myself into challenging external projects that force change whether I like it or not. And so essentially I'm looking at that principle that I have for myself and I'm asking, how well did I adhere to that this year? What is the rating of 10 and what is the reason for it? Example, high standards, high velocity, narrow focus, 8 out of 10, acted in the corners with this for most of the year, worked on some challenging projects, so on and so on and so forth. And then we have the general review question. So which activities drained you and why? Which activities energized you and made you feel most alive and why? Which people drained you and why? Which people energized you and made you feel most alive and why? In what ways did you self-sabotage? It's going to be a deep question. You might need to think about it. In what ways did you overcome the resistance and escape the comfort zone? Which skills or significant new knowledge did you acquire, if any? What were you wrong about? Which lessons did you learn beyond those that you've already written about in your areas review? 2 more. If some third-party observer was to write an overview of your last year, what would they write? Specifically, what would they write about how you acted and the decisions you made or didn't make? And then what are the biggest personal bottlenecks you're currently facing? For example, might be that your lack of good sleep routine and hygiene means constantly low energy levels, or your lack of focus is holding you back, and so you need to focus on building your daily deep work habit. Think about the bottlenecks in your way. Okay, let's now move on to the bridge, and we're going to start with principles. Principles are deep, fundamental truths, classic truths, generic common denominators. They're tightly woven threads running with exactness, consistency, beauty, and strength through the fabric of life. Stephen Covey. So principles are these higher level ideals that you want to abide by, and they act as filters for your planning, decision making, and actions, especially if you prime yourself with them on a regular basis, which is why I recommend printing out your list of principles and reviewing it on a daily basis, like every morning. I know it's typical self-help stuff, but it works. Now, principles are idealistic, so they're not a representation of your worst self, but your best self. The best version of you abides by these principles. It's sort of like this North Star that you want to live by. They are also likely to change based on your priorities and focus. So at the moment, I'm heavily involved in my work, and most of my principles revolve around that. Previously, they've been less work-oriented, more family-oriented, and so forth. Principles can be quotes that mean something to you. They don't need to be your exact words. They can be things you've written. There's no format, but they just have to have some sort of meaning to you. There needs to be some emotional resonance with them. It's worth taking some time to really define these. Sell them to yourself. Set no more than 10 though. And if you're struggling to come up with some, look through your book highlights to begin with. And then just think about like ways in which you're acting, which you don't want to act, and how you could potentially convert that into a principle that would be the opposite, right? So if you're like an overthinker, you constantly get stuck in analysis paralysis, you might set a principle that is something to do with action orientation, like the one that I showed you earlier, like high standards, high velocity, narrow focus, or that first one, throw yourself into challenging external projects. So here are mine. I've got 6. If I'm not failing occasionally, then I'm being too conservative. The work works on me more than I work on it. Power is derived from taking responsibility, weakness from disavowing it. High standards, high velocity, iron focus. Water flows downhill. Get directionally accurate, create alignment, and find the path of leverage. And then acting for the sake of acting and choosing churn over stability is central to life and its intensification. Favor chaos creation. You see that's a quote from Venkatesh Rao. Great line. I love it. So once you've done this, you want to write 1 to 3 paragraphs about why you've set the principle. So for example, with one of mine, I've written, I am a 100 times more effective person when I'm working on things that interest me and feel important. Figuring out what those are and what the path looks like is critical. It's also a process of trial and error, not just theory. Find this path through action, but step back occasionally to review, reflect, and reorient, like we're doing with this annual review and plan. Okay, once you've worked on the principles and you've defined those clearly and printed them out, make sure to do that. You want to take some time to review your position. This is a new addition to my planning process, my review process, and it's born out of a lot of reading on strategy. So business strategy, war strategy, all this kind of stuff. 2 books that I recommend from Richard Rumelt, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, and The Crux. They are fantastic reads. But if you plan without considering your position to begin with, then your plan will likely be mediocre. Some people just do this intuitively. Of course, they keep they analyze their position while they're planning. But a lot of people actually just set goals for the new year based on some aspirational ideal without paying attention to the leverage points that already exist within the system that is themselves. This is not a good way to do things. It's not strategic. The starting point for strategy is looking at where you are and what you have. As Jason Cohen says, a great idea or great strategy that you can't execute well isn't a good strategy for you. So you want to work through the following questions and prompts, and that they will help you build a strong foundation for planning out the next year. What skills do I have? What's the work that feels like play to me? For example, I can write for hours on end where most people struggle to get started. What areas of knowledge do I have reasonable depth in? How do these areas overlap, if they do, to produce unique insights that give me an edge? What am I curious about? Curiosity is a powerful driver of motivation and energy and should be considered a source of leverage or a source of advantage. Who's in my circle? Who's in my network? You don't need to do anything with this information, but it's just worth writing out so you can kind of analyze it and feed it back into your brain. You're externalizing this stuff. Who's on my team? If you're running a business or you're an executive or whatever, you have a team and you might not always think about like them as a resource. It's very easy to just act on autopilot. How much time resource do I have? Obviously, everyone has the same 24 hours in a day, but the person who has 3 kids and is taking care of their aging parents, of course, has less free time to put towards a side hustle, for instance, than the unemployed 19-year-old. And there are certain things the unemployed 19-year-old can do that the other person can't, and certain things this other person, hopefully, due to their wisdom and maturity, can do that the 19-year-old can't or won't. How much energy resource do I have? So if you're a high energy person, then this is a source of advantage. If you're low energy, then you should view this as probably as a bottleneck that should be solved for. What are my financial resources? This is relevant with goals and planning and so forth, because a lot of the work that we do, well, if you're knowledge work, a lot of the work that you do can be outsourced. And if you've got the financial resource to outsource it, then it often makes sense. And then what other sources of advantage do I have? Worth taking the time to brainstorm about this. Could be that you have like a social media channel with lots of followers or an email list or whatever. These are sources of advantage. Okay, we're going to move on to the planning phase now. We have bridged with principles and position. We've done our review, and now it's time to look forward to the next year. We want to start at a high level. I like to plan the next year at a high level, not too much definition and detail, because things change too fast. The more detailed, actionable planning should happen on 90-day timescales, in my opinion. Also, if you're planning in 90-day cycles, then you will be reviewing your annual goals every quarter, and that you can adjust them as needed if circumstances change. What you don't want to do is lock yourself in to a very long-term goal with limited information and then realize that it's actually not the most optimal goal. There is a virtue in commitment, of course. There's also a virtue in quitting, and sometimes quitting is very strategic. So I like to plan specifically in 90-day sprints and cycles, but at a high level, just set some goals. So let me give you a concrete example. Let's say you run a business and you want to double revenue next year. Well, that's great, but you probably shouldn't plan out to the very specific task exactly how you're going to double revenue over the next 12 months, because you might get 2 months into the year and then something happens in your business that requires you to shift focus, or you find an opportunity elsewhere that will allow you to triple revenue. If you are too locked in to this very specific, narrow, detailed plan over 12 months, then you might not see those opportunities as clearly. Still, it's useful to set these sort of high level goals, right? But there are a few principles you want to keep in mind. The first is you want to do less but clearer and better. Most people set too many goals. They never achieve them because they're in a state of high motivation when they set the goals. They think they can do more than they actually can. Their ambition exceeds them. And when the rubber hits the road and they have to execute, everything falls apart. However, you need some degree of challenge. You want your goals to be challenging enough to create this activation energy and motivate you, but not too challenging as to be discouraging. If you make your goals too easy, then you likely will not work towards it because they just will not excite you. Commitment to goals has its own meta benefits, regardless of what the goal is. In other words, you gain something by simply applying yourself in pursuit of a goal, regardless of whether that goal is the most perfect thing you could work on. What this means is that you shouldn't overthink your goals or try to set perfect goals, because the simple act of committing to something over long time frames will make you a better person and will lead you to clarity anyway. It does mean that you should view your goals as commitments, right? You are going to do this. It's not just some vague desire. It's something you're committed to. They are not nice to do's, they are must do's. If you don't know what goals to set, by the way, you should start with the problems that exist in your life and work. It's crazy to me, and I've been guilty of this as well, like how many people say, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to work on, and it's like, bro, your business is declining, or like, you need to lose some weight, man. Like, start there. There are goals that are obvious for you to set, but you're trying to be like too smart and abstract and theoretical and find the perfect path. No, start with the problems that exist in your life and work, or the opportunities that are in front of you. A couple of guiding questions that might help you as you work through this process. What could you work on that your future self would respect you the most for? What is the obvious but scary goal you should set? You might not always know what this is, but you also might. And it's not a question of like clarity and figuring it out. It's a question of courage. Are you setting goals based on what you think you desire or what you authentically desire? And then which goal would produce the most personal growth if achieved? Okay, so there's two sort of steps to this. You want to start by writing as many goals for each area of your life, the areas that you use in the review. This is a brainstorming exercise, so just jot down anything that comes to mind, even if it seems outlandish or kind of dumb, but just list them all out, okay? This is divergence. And then once you've done that, you want to narrow each area down to 1 to 3 goals, maximum 3. It's better to have one challenging goal than 3 mediocre ones that you wouldn't care about if you achieve, but do not set more than 3. Narrow that list down, and then once you've done that, it is time to move on to the second step of the planning phase, which is a 90-day cycle plan. Richard Rumelt in Good Strategy, Bad Strategy says, the more uncertain and dynamic the situation, the more proximate a strategic objective must be. The proximate objective is guided by forecasts of the future, but the more uncertain the future, the more its essential logic is that of taking a strong position and creating options, not of looking far ahead. We don't want to plan too far out into the future because we don't know what's going to happen. The timescale of a year is uncertain. It's dynamic. 90 days is a lot shorter. It's a lot more proximate, right? And so you want to set objectives that are closer to us and more manageable. The other reason we want to operate in 90-day cycles is because of Parkinson's law. Work expands as to fill the time allotted to it. And what we often do is we set these yearly goals that actually could be achieved in a lot less time, right? You might say, I want to create 12 YouTube videos next year, 1 per month. And it's like, well, why don't you create 12 in 90 days? Why can't you do 4 per month? You probably can. You can work and operate much faster if you simply decide to do so. And there's an efficiency that is gained by compressing these timelines. A couple of principles on this more specific type of planning. You want to be anti-incremental. So you want to find the path of leverage. Look at your position review from earlier and look at what you could do that is leveraged instead of just like generic and standard, right? What is the unique cycle plan that you can create based on where you're at? Just remember though, because this is a trap for people who like to overthink and be super strategic, working on something is better than working on nothing. So if you find yourself getting stuck in these analysis paralysis loops, then remind yourself of this. The path of leverage is found in doing, not endlessly theorizing. As mentioned before, you want to make your goals commitments. You want to make your cycle plan a commitment too. This is what you are going to do. You want to play iterated games aligned with your long-term vision. A great book to read on this called Winning Long-Term Games. Do what is important, not merely urgent. Again, leverage. And then solve problems, don't just capture opportunities. I think Hormozi said this, opportunities are shiny and fun, and they're usually the work that you like doing. Problems are pretty easy to define, but they're hard to work on, and they generally create a lot of resistance, and you want to avoid them. And so you need to keep that in mind as you're planning. You don't want to avoid the hard thing that is necessary, right? A couple more. Do less but better. Don't diffuse your focus unnecessarily. Also, don't underload yourself, because sometimes working on multiple projects can be a good thing. If working on one means you'll be underloaded. I have a video on that. It's called How to Balance Multiple Projects. You might want to check it out. And then seasons, not constant balance. So some cycles you might want to focus on your health more and work less, and vice versa in other seasons. What you don't want to do is try and equally balance everything all at once. I don't think this works well. It doesn't allow for the sense of intensity you get with sort of a singular or primary focus. Now, there are three main steps to planning out a 90-day cycle. The first is divergence. So we want to engage in the sort of open creative brainstorming process where we list everything we could work on over the next 90 days. This is particularly useful if you're not clear on what it is you should focus on, but it's also useful even if you have an idea of what you're going to do, because it can often trigger insight into better goals and projects that you haven't thought of prior. Then you want to converge. So narrow down and decide what to work on the same way you did with the goals, the annual goals. And then it's about definition. What are the specifics? What is the how? What are the actions you're going to take? What are the systems you're going to use? How will you structure things? Starting with divergence. List out all the possible things you could work on over the next 90 days, including but not limited to goals, so work, physical, family, spiritual, projects, both ongoing projects, new projects, those you put on the back burner, problems that could or need to be solved, opportunities that could be captured, and anything else that comes to mind. You want to get it all out here. Again, don't judge, don't self-critique. This is brainstorming. Here's an example of what a divergence list might look like. Obviously a lot longer than this, but is just a bunch of goals here. Create course, launch, write first draft of book, so on and so on and so forth. I can't do all of these in 90 days. Now you must choose. This is a challenging step because it introduces trade-offs, opportunity costs, and can quickly lead one into overthinking if not careful. You want to look at your list and identify what you think are the most important goals and projects that you could realistically tackle in the next 90 days. As you're doing this, think about demand, load, focus, the cost of doing things, and remember the golden mean of challenge. You're looking for the right amount of load. It should be challenging, but you shouldn't spread yourself too thin. Two questions to keep in mind when you're really stuck is this the highest leverage thing I could do? Is there a better goal that I'm choosing to ignore because it's outside of my comfort zone? And is this a problem that needs to be solved or an opportunity that I want to capture? Am I chasing a shiny object that interests me at the expense of solving an important problem? So for each objective, we want to run it through three steps, three questions, right? So what are the key steps, tasks, and milestones? What systems do I need to put in place? And then what is the cost of this? The key steps, this is where you break things down in detail, right? So here's an example, publish 15 YouTube videos to hit my 100 video goal. And then I've got the key steps underneath. Ideate 5 video ideas, brainstorm, outline, draft, record, edit video 1, blah, blah, blah. And then so on and so on and so forth. Another objective, cut to 87 kgs. Key milestones, you can see that it's just the weight going down. And then for the action steps, it's just rely purely on daily, weekly systems for this. So you want to define these systems that enable you to complete these tasks and steps. Saying I'll make 5 YouTube videos is merely a desire. It needs to be structured as a system as well. Like I'll spend 2 hours every morning writing scripts. Now, not every goal can be reduced to pure systems, especially those that are dynamic, but where possible, you should identify and define the actual processes that will move the needle. For example, going back to my YouTube goal, I've got the key milestones, video 87, video 88, I've got the action steps, and then the systems every day. Write 90 minutes on YouTube scripts every morning. Ideate 10 to 15 minutes every morning. Weekly, batch film on Fridays. Objective 2, cutting to 87 kg. Got the key milestones. There's the action steps. I've said, look, there's no action steps to this. It's just systems that I need to rely on because it's a process-oriented goal. And every day, tracking macros, weighing myself every morning, walking 10K steps, sleep by 10 p.m. And then weekly, you can see the training regime. So, just to recap that, we're going from key steps, tasks, and milestones through to systems. And then to finish things off, we want to look at the cost. Every action you take, every project you commit to has a trade-off. The 3 hours you spend on one thing means you can't spend 3 hours on something else. It's useful to define what these costs are, not necessarily in depth, but just to be aware of them for a few reasons. First, it will refine your plan because sometimes when you start counting the cost, you realize that what you've planned out is too ambitious and you're not comfortable with the trade-offs. Or it's the opposite. You realize you can do a lot more. Also, you might find that you don't care enough about an objective given its cost and you'll choose something else instead. Finally, you won't be as surprised when that cost enters the picture. Maybe you commit to something and you know it's going to take a lot of work and then you're in the midst of working on that thing and it's stressful and you're busy, but because you've identified in advance that it's going to be that way, you're less surprised. So that is basically it for this review. We went through a lot of stuff. We started with the preparation phase, the setup, the processing. We went through to the review, starting with the free-form narrative review and then moving on to the more specific prompt-based review questions. And then we bridged by looking at principles, defining some principles for ourselves, looking at our position, our leverage points, our advantages, our sources of advantage, and then we engaged in the final phase, the planning phase, looking at the annual goals and then narrowing it down into a 90-day cycle plan as we've just looked at with more specific details, action steps, systems, and so forth. Hope you found value in this video. Remember, if you want to get the entire workbook and work through it yourself without having to go through this entire video again, then click the link in the description below and you can grab that completely for free. Hope you enjoyed watching and I will see you next time. Cheers.